So I'll tell them you said hello. I'll see their insurance. Oh, that's it. There's actually, yes, I'm not going to get it. I just finished this
Thank you. Hello. Greetings. Okay. Okay. Just kind of pop up stairs on that side. Great.
In fact, Karen, will you stay down here while I
Sure. Sure.
go up on the... Hi, ladies. Good evening. I want to introduce to you Karen Eiseminger. She is a nurse practitioner, and she's a professor, and she just recently retired from...
University of Indianapolis. Yay. Go Greyhounds. Yes. No.
She still works one day a week at Aspire, and she has been going to Grace for years.
Yes.
So we are lucky enough and blessed enough to have Karen volunteering her time to train and teach us, and it's a pleasure.
Thank you.
So we're thrilled to have her
I'm
tonight.
very excited to be here. So I'll say it once, and I'll say it 10 more times. If you have any questions, on the very last slide is my email. Please don't hesitate to email me. If we don't cover everything we should cover, and I know Dina's going to talk about this as well, but this is what I would do in a whole semester for graduate students in about an hour tonight. So, I'll just do the best I can. But if you ever have any questions, just email. And so I have to shout out to two people that I've known for a while. Sue is here. I used to work on the ethics committee at the Heart Center. So yay for that. And then Sue Moore. Sue Moore, where?
Sue's right here.
Darling, we've been together a long time, so that was sweet for her to come. So
That's great. And this is our leadership team, the Women for Women's Life. So they've been supporting all of us for months and months and a few years, some of us. So Deanie, Heidi, Teresa, and Kathy. Amanda is not here tonight. But we would like to pray for all of you guys tonight, and we'd like to pray for Karen.
please do.
Heavenly Father, thank you so much for all of these women that are represented here tonight. And thank you for Karen and her willingness to serve you and to serve us and to give of herself. We are so blessed to have her. We just ask that you would anoint her and that you would help us to be in tune with whatever it is Karen has to share with us tonight. We just ask that you would speak through her and you would help us to nudge each other on to better health and to loving each other well, Lord. It's such a privilege to be able to be here and to have real professionals training us. So we just ask that you would help us to calm ourselves and to have an enjoyable evening with each other. And we just are so grateful for the opportunity to learn tonight. So thank you so much, Lord. It's a privilege to be here. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Okay.
So Deanie is going to interview Karen. Here you go, Deanie.
Thank you. So, as Karen alluded, I think anyone who's here knows that we could probably spend 5 days straight talking about mental health issues. It's in the news constantly. We're experiencing it in our own families, maybe even ourselves. And Karen has been kind enough to do a whole series with the church for group leaders that is a one night focus on anxiety, a second night focus on depression, and then the last one is going to be on suicide. So what we're doing is condensing that down tonight. And I think we probably made... Right. So I think we probably made Karen crazy because she would love for us to have, I'm exaggerating, but I think she would love for us to have 400 slides tonight because we all know we could have them, right? And so the reason why we're interviewing is that we as a leadership team came up with some questions that are kind of simple questions. We've given you the slides, so you'll have a lot of information. As Karen said at the end, you'll have her email. What we're going to do is focus on each topic 20 minutes or so. What I would ask you to do, if it's okay, in order for us to keep moving on all three topics, is if you have questions, write it down. At the very end of the session, we will field any questions with Karen about anything that you want to talk about as the topic of mental health and that sort of thing. So that is how we're going to focus on our evening. So we're really glad you're here, and we appreciate you being here. And Karen, we so appreciate you being here. You're welcome.
My honor and joy.
Right.
And I have to pull back to see. It's up there, but
Yeah.
I told Linda.
Look how small that is up there, ladies.
I can't read it.
I don't care how young you are. You can't see that.
I come back here, and so before we get started on the official questions and stuff, I just want to tell you who I am.
Yes.
And you've got a lot of that from Linda right now, so we don't know much. But if you don't know what nurse practitioners are, you've got several people in the room that could talk to you about nurse practitioners. My PhD is in ethics, and that's how I know Sue from the Heart Center. I'm very compassionate about quality of life issues and the ethics perspective. But I specialize in my private practice in behavioral health, and that's at Aspire, Indiana, and that's around the corner. I mean, it's very, very close. So that's that.
So are you, just out of curiosity, you're doing 1 day a week at Aspire.
I am.
Are you going to continue to do that for very long, or do you are? Because you want to keep yourself abreast? And yes, exactly. Okay.
Keep the brain working.
That's great. Okay. So our first topic we're going to talk about, am I too loud? Like, do I sound ridiculously loud? Hey, you know how when you use a microphone? Yes? Oh, she's not loud enough? Okay.
Okay. Is this better?
I definitely don't have a problem with big voice. You know that, Mary Kay. So the first topic is going to be on anxiety. And what our first question is can you tell us what anxiety is and why does it occur?
Yeah, I will. Can you ask that again in just about 2 minutes?
Yeah.
Because I wanted to give Deanie asked me to talk a little bit about some myths. And she included that. And so I think there's 2 myths very relevant to faith-based appreciation for anxiety and depression and suicide as well. So I will start out with that as well.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, we said what's on the board several times up here, that if we don't cover every slide, they're in there for your perusal later on, and I might just go quickly past things. So, and these are that gives you the orientation that I'm going to be asked about and we're going to discuss. So I just want to talk about why we've got like 3 slides at the beginning. I'm so sorry here, dear.
No,
Please forgive me.
Of course, whatever we need.
I wanted you guys to see the relevant appreciation for anxiety and depression about all conditions that are being treated in the United States. So right there, number 1, the first one is hypertension, but the second one, the most treated condition is anxiety, general anxiety disorder, plus I'll give you some examples of other types of anxiety in that. Third, of course, is cholesterol, and 4th is depression. So you see the 2 topics that we're going to talk about tonight are very prevalent, very important, and hence worthy of our time.
Absolutely.
So 2 myths here. So the first myth is those people who have mental health illnesses don't really only need spiritual help. I forget what order I put them in. Only need spiritual help. If they relied on God more, this is in air quotes, if they relied on God more, then they wouldn't have anxiety. They would just trust in the Lord. If their heart was on fire for Jesus, they wouldn't be depressed. Mm-hmm. And so that I just felt is a myth. And there are biological and physiological and pathophysiological and psychological issues in these conditions, as well as we're going to talk about in the next myth right there, is that those with a mental health illness need medical treatment and not a faith-based community. When anybody say that's wrong, that is a myth, because the good Lord loves them, is interested in their life, can give them power, give them peace, give them joy,
right.
Lessen their depression. And so they may need some medical care as well as, good things from the good Lord.
Right.
So those are the 2 myths I included. I hope those are okay.
Perfect.
From your perspective.
Perfect.
And then here's your question.
Yeah. So can you just tell us in your own words, what is anxiety?
Well, I did use some other quotes, so I apologize. Some of these will be in my own words and others will be, a good quote.
Sure.
But so basically, anxiety, I'll talk about first, is the pathophysiological process. And in that perspective, there are these neurotransmitters at the beginning. If we had more time, I'd go over it with you. But when I'm teaching future nurse practitioners, they need to know how each of these work as far as anxiety goes. Then there's 2 sections in the brain that are particularly more in the central nervous system that are particularly involved with anxiety. And those are the amygdala, and the limbic system, emotions, as well as controlling the responses to anxiety cues. We all have anxiety cues, and how we respond to the cue is either physiological or a good thing, and we steer away from something that could harm us, so we get a little anxious and we steer away. Or it could be a bad thing in that it's pathophysiological and the limbic system will flare up, and then we get more emotional about it, and the anxiety or the fretfulness or the worriedness is disproportional to what those cues might have been. Does that make sense a little bit? And then there are the DSM-5 diagnostic criteria. This is the DSM-5 is oh, it works. I'm sorry. It works. So the DSM-5 diagnosis, this is the big book that tells us how we group these diseases, what they mean, what signs and symptoms do they have, and things like that. So this diagnostic criteria book leads to all of these appropriate anxiety disorders. And I'm not going to go over them all, but I'm not going to go over any of them because you've got them in front of you, and we can talk more about that if you choose to.
Okay.
So I think that would be my first answer.
Okay.
Second answer here is that there is that overlap, is what I was just talking about earlier, between things that are kind of normal, stressful, and what type of symptoms might you have if that's going on. If you're just stressed, I'm just stressed, I'm just stressed. And then, and what is really anxiety from that perspective, and there's an overlap between them, and you can breathe, you know, a little bit of fast heart rate, a little bit of difficulty breathing, but this is more pathologic. It meets the criteria of a mental health disorder if it's inappropriately heavy as compared to things that you would normally have in a stress situation. Okay, does that seem to make sense? And you can read more about that when we're not doing over other things.
Okay. So I'm just going to ask you to do this in your own words this time. Can I be, if I'm a person who is sometimes anxious over an issue, does that mean I have an anxiety disorder?
Probably not.
Okay.
So that,
Yeah.
that was my own words. Probably not. I mean, we would have to do a diagnostic evaluation. The general anxiety disorder, I would use that to maybe figure that out.
Uh-huh.
I would try to ascertain, does it happen more days than not in a week?
Mm-hmm.
So if it tends to happen at least 3 or more days in a week over about 6 months,
Okay.
then that might be a high red flag that you might have general anxiety disorder.
Okay. Can anxiety be exacerbated by other medical
Yeah,
conditions?
and that's where we are right here.
Mhm.
So this other medical conditions, and there are coronary issues, angina, where you have that squeezing heart pain. A lot of these could lead you to anxiety-type symptoms. I'm not going to go over them again because of time, but you know that it's there, and there's other things. Hyperthyroidism is one that's a high on the list that could really mimic anxiety and worry until you get it. That's why you need a complete physical in your labs initially if it is of concern. And these are some of the diagnoses that they may be concerned about.
Okay.
And what we would do in that situation, if you turned out, let's again use hyperthyroidism as an example, if it turns out that you are, my back is to you guys, I'm so sorry. I'll turn around a little bit. If it looks like you do have hyperthyroidism, then what we would do is treat the organic symptom first before we might even get into some of the counseling and the other treatment for anxiety, because what if it went away? What if it was just hyperthyroidism, you know, so.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. The good thing about Karen is that she is an NP as well, a nurse practitioner, so she's looking at it from a medical and a mental perspective, which I love. I mean, I don't know how about all of you when you've experienced that, but it's really, really good. So I think this is kind of an open-ended question in a way, but, you know, we ask the question is what's the best method or pharmacology for dealing with anxiety? Is it both?
Yes.
Is it sometimes only counseling? Is it
Yeah.
often both in your mind? What happens with that?
Well, I'll go through the next few slides and come right back to that.
Okay.
Because you'll need just a little bit of overlap with that.
Okay.
So basically, this is a little bit like we were talking about early, this free-floating sensation. This picture tells 1,000 words. It's a very famous painting. I'm not going to tell you more about it now because otherwise, but I do like this phrase down here. Fear sees a threat and anxiety imagines one. Isn't that beautiful? It's just beautiful.
Say that again.
It's right here on the.
That's okay, just say it again.
Fear sees a threat and anxiety imagines one.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
Fear screams, get out. Because that's safe, you know, if somebody's running after you and you need to get out, you have a reason to do that. But anxiety ponders, what would this happen? What if this happened? And what if this happened? And what if this happened?
Mm-hmm.
And then we get to this one here. This is a really nice quote from Max Lucado in his book, Fret Not. I'll not go over that, but it's a great example of the what ifs, the what if, the what if.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, so here are your symptoms for that. That was the original first question with that. Just pay attention to these first two right up there at the top. Excessive worry, most of the time, and then it's difficult to control the worry, okay? That builds up a little bit on our
Right.
first discussion, and the rest is there for you to think about. So this is the overlap that you just asked about.
Right.
I'm going to stand up because my neck is hurting this
Oh,
way.
I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Would you, is it easier to stand, is to sit here? On this side?
As long as you don't mind this. My backside is not the best side of me, but no, I think I can see everything.
Okay.
Yeah, because before I couldn't see it. So in generalities, you treat a lot of mental health, this is so broken down, I apologize, but I'll do the best I can. You treat a lot of mental health disorders with psychotherapy or pharmacotherapy or both, okay? Most frequently, both is the right answer to the question. So combination pharmacotherapy and psychotherapy, and it's all these disorders. I'm sorry, I've got some lingo in there, but the lingo is defined elsewhere in your PowerPoint. But major depressive disorder, general anxiety, I won't read the rest, but most of all, we use both psychotherapy and pharmacology. And which do we do first? It depends on the symptoms of the patients, but sometimes we do the medicine right at the same time they start their psychotherapy, and it takes a while for the medicines to work. Excuse me. And then while you're getting to know your therapist and you're getting into some of those issues, that'll come over time. But both general anxiety disorder, and then it gives you an example of when you would do medicines only, and that's really much more for schizophrenia, and one of those other very heavy mental illnesses. And then this is, maybe you want me to do this or maybe you don't. This is a discussion of what some of the medicines are.
Sure. I mean, I think we don't want to dwell on them, but I think we can go ahead and talk about some of them, yeah.
Yeah, this is real. It's when you prescribe an antidepressant for somebody that has anxiety, you might think that's odd. It's counterintuitive. They have anxiety and not depression. Although keep in mind, we're trying to separate this tonight into anxiety, depression, and suicide. But there's a clear overlap between anxiety and depression. Some people have anxiety only. Some people have depression only. But there's an overlap. Again, beyond what we're doing in this time together. So what that little first thing to begin with talks about oddness of using an antidepressant in both the A and the D. So the A stands for anxiety, the D stands for depression, and you can kind of see on down. So for anxiety, we might use beta blockers. That's a heart medicine. It helps slow the heart down, and it helps with that. Benzodiazepines, your Klonopin, etc. And then some other meds, and then Wellbutrin and some of the atypical antipsychotics you might use for depression only. Mm-hmm. Again, that's for your future reference because I'm not going to go into each one or how they work. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's good. This question wasn't on your list, but I'm going to ask it anyway. How do you feel that people should choose a counselor? What's the best way when you're in the midst? And let me also clarify this by saying, let's say that counselors are easily found and easily gotten into, which we all know if we've had anything going on in our lives is not the case right now because of COVID and what the impact has been for that and that sort of thing. So give us a little advice on how to choose a counselor.
I would take the advice of your primary care provider.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I do. Is, the last few years I've done mental health only, but that's what Sue does. And you do a primary care provider, and they may know the type of counseling that they want you to have.
Okay.
And without getting into lots of them, there's CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy,
Mm-hmm.
DBT with a dialectical approach, with personality disorder. So again, that you're going to get like fine-tune that therapy a bit. Word of mouth is really good. Right here at the church, they have a list of faith-based counselors that have been vetted.
Right.
And so we'll find out about those. I always recommend a faith-based counselor if they're willing to do that. And I like the Church at the Crossing had a wonderful counseling center, and anyway, that's one I like to refer to.
So when you get into a relationship with a counselor, and let's say you've gone 5 times, and it just doesn't feel like it's clicking. And maybe it's not a counselor for a purpose of schizophrenia or something. It's more about depression or anxiety, that kind of thing. What do you do if you need to change? What do you do if you don't feel comfortable with the counselor? And I don't mean that person is doing anything inappropriate, but that you just don't feel you can open up, or, what's the next step then? Just simply find another one?
Well, I would converse with the one that you have and say, for some reason, I'm just not feeling good, or I feel awkward, I feel sad, whatever you feel. So you identify what you feel and why you think it's not working.
Right.
So what's the definition of working?
Right.
Some of the working is hard and sad, and
Sure.
So if you're feeling
Right.
hard and sad, I don't know, but if you feel like the therapist is rude or disinterested or doesn't have good eye contact, that's a different topic.
Okay. So it's really just address it nicely and kindly.
I always think honesty is the best
Yeah,
policy,
right.
to figure that out. And then, you might ask around, but not leave your therapist.
Sure.
Because they're hard to get.
Sure.
So keep your name on the books.
Right.
And then start looking.
Okay. If anxiety is untreated, what are the risks?
Okay. We're going to talk much more about if depression is untreated, because that will lead right into the suicide conversation. And not that anxiety patients could not commit suicide, because as you'll learn when we get to that section, any person of any type, any gender, any society status could commit suicide. But for anxious patients, it's a quality of life issue. It's a tremendous quality of life issue. And it can lead to, and again, on the longer series that we had, I had a long discussion and intro at the beginning about ways in which you are able to, I'm trying to think of the best way to impact your life, and actually you will then they have research. I'm sorry, this is not coming to me because I didn't prep this question. I apologize.
That's okay.
So they have shown the statistics, people with mental health disorders have a much higher rate of premature death. And that premature death is, we were talking with Jenny at this table about adverse childhood experiences and how that could lead to premature death. And so that they could, if they have high ACE scores and they have that general anxiety as a result of that, and that could lead to premature death because they're not seeing they're not compliant. I don't like the word compliant, but I said it, so you might know what that means. Does that help your answer?
I think so.
It's a quality of life. I mean, for example, I have a very successful person who has to drive a lot of places, and he has very bad general anxiety disorder, and he wants to keep his job. But when he crosses a bridge, he gets extremely anxious. He can barely drive his car across the bridge, so we need to, that's an impact. And so then I'm working with him in that regard as well as his therapist. I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, that does. I think the reason why we asked that question was more about, okay, if I'm anxious, does that mean that if I don't treat my anxiety, I'm going to get depressed? And if I don't treat my anxiety, I'm going to get OCD, or I'm going to do, those things. And that's kind of what we were thinking is things like this should be treated. And we shouldn't let them go, essentially, right? Okay. Obviously, we're all in church, and we're all women of God, and one of the things that we really want to talk about, and you've alluded to it in the very beginning, is the whole relationship with God, and how can that help with anxiety? What can we do? What are the things that are best for us when we're anxious?
I will have a lot of references for that throughout the talk. And again, to save time, I might wait till they're with the depression, because a lot of the things that we would do actually would help a person who is both anxious or depressed.
Okay.
But let me cover a few more things until we get there.
Okay.
Just ever so quickly, these were medicines by name. So in case you wanted to know, my neighbor's on Paxil, or somebody's on Prozac. Those are the categories of the name and what they do, and we're not going to go more than that. And this begins to talk about depression. So I will just wait and cover some of these other faith-based things, but I do have a lot in there on that.
Okay. How can we as friends, moms, sisters, daughters, wives, all of those things, best help someone with anxiety?
Yeah, that'll be covered.
Okay. Okay.
I knew you had a time frame, so it really overlaps
Okay.
with depression.
Well, we still have our time, so we are going to go ahead and talk about depression next then. Okay. And they're very similar questions. Can you give us the depression information on what it is and why it occurs?
Sure.
Okay. All the reasons it could occur.
Sure. Well,
Not all, but I mean, no, you know what I mean.
I'll do the best I can. I'm sorry, you guys.
No.
Oh man, that's hard. So this is a good slide on what is depression like, and you might begin to see some of this in somebody's life. They might not sleep as well. They're more restless. They're more achy. There's pronounced anhedonia, and you have probably no idea what that is. It's one of my favorite words. That means loss of pleasure in doing things that they normally found pleasurable. That is one of the keys to major depressive disorder, is loss of pleasure, and then also depression, worry, sadness, etc. So those are some of her answers to her question on what is depression. And then this is a really good slide. I like it because it talks about causes of depression, which is what you're just asking about. There's some purely psychological causes. Something happens with a life event. Somebody loses a job. They retire from a job that they were downsized. They have a major breakup, especially in the adolescence. Excuse me. Obviously death, etc. And then there are the purely biological that have little or nothing to do with the environmental factors, and then interaction with those neurotransmitters, like I talked about, that are there regardless of whether you've had a breakup, regardless of that. So this is your biological or your pathophysiological, and then frequently it is always the interchange between those two, okay? If that helps that at all.
Okay, that's great.
So I like this one little example on this slide that I'll give real quickly here. People talk about biological things related to mental health and also genetics. And then they also talk about environmental. So people say, is it the environment? Or are they just born this way? Is it passed down because my grandmother was always like that, etc. So how I like to look at this is these biological conditions, the genetics condition, etc., they load the gun in your head to be more sensitive to things, but your environment might pull the trigger. So while these genetic conditions are there, while there might be biological things that are going on or pathophysiological, sometimes it takes these environmental things that stimulates them.
Right.
Okay? So that's one example on that. Here are your differential diagnoses. Excuse me, I apologize. Different types of depressions. I'm not going to read them, but you'll see them on there. Bipolar, postpartum, major depressive disorder, etc. Some other statistics about major depressive disorder that I thought you might want to know. 20 to 30% of patients seen in family practice are suffering from some type of depression. That's a lot. What would you say, Sue? At least.
So is that statistic after COVID, or is it before COVID?
Both.
Okay.
But it's worse after COVID.
Yes, of course.
Especially during COVID.
Okay. So the 30% is really definitely, we're not dealing with 40 or 50% or anything like that, typically, that we're aware of.
That's correct.
Okay.
That I'm aware of.
Okay.
Yeah. So, but that's 1 in 3 people. That's a lot.
Yes, it is.
So, and you can see some of the difference between major depressive disorder, which is also called unipolar, usually lasts 6 to 8 months. It can last longer. Here's the discussion on if you've had one episode, will you have it again? It will last even longer. Again, can't necessarily get into that right here tonight. But I also talked about the vulnerability of genetics in the last slide I talked about. Okay, so those are some of your causes of depression. This is a big, fat, long DSM criteria for major depressive disorder. Not going to go over tonight, but you may be interested in it because you might think, oh my gosh, am I a little bit down? Do I have depression? And really the two main things at the top, depressed mood most of the day, nearly every day, marked diminution or interest in pleasure. And the rest might be there as well, okay?
So that last slide before, Karen, there was that women technically higher in women 2 to 1.
Yes.
Does that have anything to do with hormones? Does that have anything to do with why is that? Do you think? Well,
the place of women in our society has definitely changed over time. We have more freedom to be who we want to be now, and we were more oppressed in the past. So that's there. And of course, hormones do make a difference, and that you'll see that in the postpartum depression in particular. And then PMDD, which is a phenomenon related to the menstrual cycle, and that reason as well.
Okay.
A lot of, I'm going out on a limb and saying this because I believe it, a lot of it is self-image. We have a standard in our society. If you open any magazine, I don't look like the person in the magazine, and I feel bad about myself. I can't go to a swimming pool because I look terrible in a bathing suit. That type of things, and then that kind of feeds your self-image, and I think and I don't think men have that as much. Anybody disagree with me on that?
A few probably, but not nearly as many as women.
Yeah.
Has that changed with social media? Has that number, has it, you say 2 to 1, but just curious.
I don't know if that statistic has changed due to social media, but social media has been shown to not make it better.
Right, obviously.
Not make it better.
Right, okay.
Especially like Facebook and some of the others that feed on to especially in adolescence.
Sure. Okay, great. Okay, so did you have other slides before I go on to the next question?
Again, you asked me to go back, so I just went over that one.
Uh-huh.
And then this is the screening tool that we use, and again, we go back to those 2 questions. But if you're in your primary care and seeing, your regular checkup every year, they may give you this tool. It's called a PHQ-9, and it has all those questions and those symptoms that we talked about in there. This is a quick and dirty way of remembering some of the key symptoms of depression. It's called SIG-E-CAPS. Sleep disorders, generally speaking, this is so general, I hate to say it, but anyway, generally speaking, people with general anxiety disorder have difficulty falling asleep, where people with major depressive disorder have difficulty staying asleep, particularly early morning awakening. And that's a big deal. We already talked about anhedonia several times. Guilt, worthlessness. Need I say any more? I mean, feeling worthless, which, do you feel worthless when Christ loves you and died for you? I mean, no. So, this is how we can begin to support the people that are feeling worthless at that time. Appetite to stimulus, either eating too much, eating too little, suicidal thoughts, etc. Okay. Okay, I'll stop it.
Okay. So again, with depression is seeing a counselor and taking medicine?
Yep.
The typical?
Yep.
Okay. And it can also be one or the other? Is there ever a time when you're on meds and you don't see a counselor?
Oh boy, this is a controversial question. Even at Aspire, where I see patients, all of the psychiatrists there and also the psych NPs, but mostly the psychiatrists, they will not see a patient unless they're seen by one of our counselors simultaneously the entire time.
Okay.
That is kind of controversial.
Okay.
Because what if somebody is on a maintenance dose of something and doesn't really need the therapy? So, but
Right.
I think most people overlap them together,
So are psych NPs dealing with medication only?
primarily. No, well, yes and no.
Okay.
They're probably forced, oh gosh, I'm going to be in trouble.
It's okay.
I'm
You're being
so sorry.
honest.
Well, you got this time clock.
Right.
Do I need to say more? They need them to see a lot of patients quickly, and
Yeah.
therapy takes a long time.
Yeah.
And you really can't do good therapy. And yes, I see that nod. Thank you. The pressure.
So I guess the question then about psych NP versus a psychologist, not even a psychiatrist, do you see that most psychology groups or people have someone that they refer someone to specifically then? And is that happening with psychiatry more or with psych NP more?
Yeah.
It's both?
It's both, but it's primarily psychiatrists, and then in that psychiatrist group may have 1 or 2 psych NPs, and they might be 7 psychiatrists. So they might split them amongst the group,
Okay.
unless they had a referral to a certain psychiatrist or a certain psych NP.
So are psychiatrists versus psychologists, are they dealing with meds more because they can?
Yes.
Are they counseling at all?
Not so much.
Not have they ever? Sue? Okay.
They're there to do the meds.
Okay.
That doesn't mean don't ask them how their day is or how their family, or how was your last vacation.
Uh-huh.
It doesn't mean they don't do or they're not interested. But
Okay.
if you're forcing me to say, do they do meds only? I would
Most
say
often.
primarily meds only. And again, it could be because they have fabulous psychologists and fabulous social workers and counselors. That's what they do.
Which they've read the chart on and they understand what the patient's going through and all of those things. Okay.
Yeah.
So again, if untreated, depression, what are the risks?
Suicide,
What other risks are there?
premature death.
Okay.
If you look at, again, at my talk last week or whatever it was, I had a long discussion on the sequela of depression related to cost, and the huge cost, that not only just because of the treatment of the depression, but the indirect cost.
Okay.
They can't function at work,
Right.
you know, and lack of productivity in other areas. The bills get higher, you know, those
Right.
type of thing. They're too depressed to even look at the bill, you know, those
Yeah.
type of things.
So to really oversimplify it, if someone is severely depressed and not receiving any kind of help, they could not eat. They could not take other meds that they're supposed to be taking for other conditions. They could actually have physical issues then, true. Is that true?
It is possible.
Okay, okay.
That leads to, I mean, with a longer discussion on depression, that would probably be listed as a refractory depression. You know, that it is not getting better according to what, in the slide I had several earlier, you know, that with a 6 to 8 month treatment, you know, first medicine, and then you might try your second medicine, you might try an overlap, lots of combinations. This is probably a lot more than I can even justify. I apologize again. But to answer your question, those can happen in a refractory style.
Okay,
And then treatment for refractory depression, as well as the type of depression that has psychosis. On top of that, the psychosis is hallucinations and both auditory and visual hallucinations, and which can happen for depression. So
Sure.
that's another sequela that you might reference. But ECT, electroconvulsive therapy, is also beneficial for refractory depression. And it's something that you might have think of, like from the movie One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. You know, that isn't necessarily what they were doing, and that they were doing other insulin type therapies and not so good. But ECT is effective. It helps in refractory depression.
okay. And when you continue to use the word refractory depression, what do you mean exactly?
It's resistant to therapy.
Okay, that's what I thought. We're going to talk again about the whole how do we rely on God, right? We're going to talk about that. Do you want to talk about that now as it relates to these things? We're going to do that at the end.
In a little bit.
Okay, that sounds good.
Hang in there.
Okay.
I'll do it.
And are we also going to talk about how to be a good friend, mother, sister, daughter, wife?
It's all in there.
Okay, it's all in there?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay,
A lot of the answers to those questions relate to all three of these conditions. and
Sure they
so
do.
I
Yeah.
put them at the end.
yeah. So who is at risk for suicide?
Okay, so before we move to suicide,
Mm-hmm.
I'll just give you just a couple, a little bit more on the treatment of depression. So we've talked about medicines, we've talked about therapy, we've talked about ECT. And then remind me of your question in a minute.
I will.
But how do you treat a disease in general? One of the best ways is to prevent it from coming. So prevention is a real important concept for both anxiety and depression. I gathered a couple of these in here. And in the last time when I had more time, I had somebody stand up and read this, but we don't have the time today to do this. But it's in your thing. It's just it's all about child raising. It's all talking about their worth, their value. Again, we talked earlier about the adverse childhood experiences, and so this is preventative for depression. And therefore, you can help treat it by not getting it in the first place.
Sure, but the bottom line is that we could, each of us who've been a parent could have spoken those things over our children their whole lives, and they could still have issues.
Oh, absolutely.
Right, okay.
Yeah, but if you don't do that, then they're far less likely to.
Yeah, I thought someone laughed at me. Okay, so what did you want to?
Prevention, again, on the prevention side of both depression and anxiety, these fine, wonderful people can read this at their leisure. But the first one is talking about a wider definition of health. The World Health Organization says that to have a good health, it has to be not merely the absence of disease or infirmity, but mental, ting, 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 social, and physical well-being. And of course, our notion about social and mental well-being, part of that would be, a spiritual relationship and a God who loves us. So, and then the social determinants of health, we don't have time to talk about that, but there's, some vitamins that are good. Resilience, here's a really good reference on resilience, and that's going to be the answer to some of these questions. And there's a good TED Talk.
I'm gonna ask this question too as you're doing this. So obviously, you don't have to. You can hear the radio, the TV, pick up a magazine, talk to anyone about how mental health is finally being addressed as an issue among a lot of folks. What do you think led to this stigma behind mental health in the beginning? And what I mean by that is years ago when we just didn't talk about it. Was it lack of education? Was it, don't want anyone to know what's wrong with us? Where's that stigma come? Is it because when I have a mental condition, you can't see it because it's not a broken arm? What are the reasons?
Yeah, there's a lot of reasons. I think it's, the social change. We used to look our nose down on people who divorced.
Sure.
Or didn't meet a social criteria that we thought was better,
Sure.
And so if you have a crazy son, and I have that in air quotes, of course, it's not as accepted, but now we're able to just talk about it more. I think there's more education. I think there's more acceptance.
Mm-hmm.
And better cures.
Yes.
Keep in mind, better cures. I mean, I have an example in there, which we won't have time to talk about tonight. But Lewis of Lewis and Clark, and it's just a fascinating story about him. But, in that day, and this horrific depression that he had, in that day, they didn't have antidepressants. They didn't have antipsychotics for refractory depression. They didn't have therapists. He's out there in the Wild West, finding the Pacific Ocean, So, a lot of that has changed. So now that we know that there's cures, you could say, my mom had this, and after a round or two of medication, she's now better. Thank you, Jesus.
Right. Okay.
So,
Okay, great.
Does that help answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Mm-hmm. Okay.
So, again, the non-pharmacological intervention, including the current series on Grace Church. I was so excited when I heard Dave Rod talk on Friday. I thought, I'm a trendsetter. I started talking about general anxiety, and now he is. Do you think that could be the case? No, just kidding, of course. He's so brilliant and so wonderful and fabulous. But anyway, the current series, I went out and bought the book he referenced just the other day. It came yesterday. But we have a resource right here at Grace. We've got the Grace pastors that are very interested and helpful. So that's something that you can do. And so answering your questions about what we can do as wives, mothers, children, whatever, there's relaxation techniques that you can learn for yourself, and you can teach your loved one, you can teach your neighbor. Meditation, there is Christian yoga. I used to think I couldn't do yoga because I thought that Christians aren't supposed to do that. But lo and behold, there's at least 5 really good books on Christian yoga. That's something that, again, you can do, to help teach somebody to do that. Exercise, walk, bike, run, especially outside. Our connections to nature are amazing. They really help in all of these considerations, and you should encourage and be with your loved one as far as that goes.
Talk a little bit about that lifestyle modification one I have at the end. Is that not exposing yourself to things that make you depressed?
Yes.
Is it,
Lifestyle management modification in general means no smoking, no sexual promiscuity, no excessive alcohol, decreasing your cholesterol, increasing your exercise.
Okay. So you are talking about those types of things versus moving from one apartment complex to another because your neighbor is weird. Do you get what I'm saying? I'm just being.
Would you like to talk about that?
No.
Therapies.
No, I actually live in a house, and
How do you feel about that? See, that's a good therapy question right there. So.
No, but because when I saw that, I was like, okay, that's interesting. Obviously you can make those modifications with what you eat and do and drink and smoke and, those,
It's the lifestyle. What do you do about your own
Sure.
work?
Yeah.
And then encourage, when you're eating McDonald's every day, it's just not good for you. That junk it's just not good. So lots of different things.
Sure.
And you actually feel more depressed sometimes if you're not having good nutrition, not the vegetables, etc.
Right. Okay. Great.
Okay?
These are not always about me either, by the way. I'm trying to
I was
think about what other people might be thinking.
Yeah, but
And you all could think I'm weird. I don't know.
But, you know, that could be a good therapy session, you know.
It could. We can do that, Karen, if you want to.
Yeah, but not on the mics.
Okay.
So when we set this up to talk about originally, we talked about developing a toolbox that you, as the participants in the class, can develop for yourself, as well as learning those toolbox things and helping either your family member or your church congregant or your neighbor or whatever. So all of these things are kind of different things you could do, and that kind of builds on the other. But you are not alone in this issue. If you want to connect with social, if you want to know where the counselors are, if you want to know where financial help for your loved one is, that they're just not paying their bills, you know, all that. 211 is like the same thing as 911, except for help related to social conditions, etc. I already mentioned the Grace Pastors. The Stigma-Free Fishers has related to Grace and Fishers when there's really good things in that regard. So I think that's all. Okay, sorry.
That's okay.
And then basically what you could do in answer to your previous questions is to be, I'm gonna, be this close to your loved one, maybe closer. Be present. Take the phone, put it away, and just say, I just want to talk to you. And I want to hear from you. I want to hear your story. I want to hear what's happening, etc. It's empathy, empathy, empathy. And, in our other session, we're learning how to do this technique where empathy is part of that technique. And so that is just one way you could do that. Even we've talked to some people who are the spouse of people who have committed suicide. And sometimes when they went to a office appointment, it's whether the person was empathetic or didn't listen to them that was horrible in their life. So that's another thing you can do. This is a physician. I really like Dr. Kurt Thompson, and he talks about the soul of shame, and a lot of those shame questions come from that. I just like those. You can read them later. But your role as a listener cannot be overemphasized. So that goes with that as well. Some resources. I'm going to go quick, and you can read them. Oh, wait a minute. I have to say, I love this book.
Which book?
This book right here on the right-hand
sorry.
side.
Okay.
Right. Oopsie,
Okay.
sorry.
That's okay.
I even brought it with me, but it's in my car.
So
Oh,
why
maybe it's not. Maybe it's in my bag.
why do you love that book?
Well, she is a nurse practitioner. Actually, I heard her interviewed on 97.9 Moody,
Uh-huh.
and she gave a great interview. And then I looked her up, and I looked up her book, and she talks mostly about anxiety, but she talks from her own perspective, integrates scripture into it.
Great.
And I just want to go meet her and go on the talking circuit with her.
Yeah.
Know.
Well, good.
As well. But anyway, no, she
Never hurts to ask.
Yeah, but she's, but I'm not lacking in things to do. But anyway, but her heart is there. She talks about her personal experiences with us. We're all vulnerable. I mean, I hope you realize we all have had issues in depression and anxiety in our lives. And I'll speak to myself, and that's the case a little bit. So this one is basically some good resources. So another good, you can just cut and paste that if you want. And then anxiety-specific scriptures, meditate on these, think about these, pray about these, thank God for these. Hold these promises in your heart. And then the same way with depression. So that last one was anxiety, and this is depression. Again, all the ways in which God is there to help our brokenness and help our crushed spirit. So these are, again, answers to all those things.
Right.
What can we do? What can we do? What can we do? And so those are some things with that. So
Okay.
pause paragraph, suicide. And I want to say something about suicide that's probably obvious to you, but I just have to say it. It's final. When a suicide is completed, it is final. So almost everything we've talked about up till now, we had ways to intervene early, ways to do refractory care, ways to do this or that. But the finality of suicide should temper our hearts. I know it does yours, but I just wanted to express that as well. So what was your question?
The first question I had about suicide is who is at risk?
Everybody.
Everybody.
Yeah.
So that thing that you hear, or let's say an example. I'm going to say this because I'm sure we've all had this conversation. You know someone whose family member committed suicide, and you say out loud, "Oh, I could never commit suicide. That would, never be something I would do, or, those kinds of things. What makes someone, other than the mental health aspect, what makes someone not be a suicide probable person? Absolutely nothing, right? Because what you're saying is everyone could be driven to that?
Yeah, it is possible that everybody could be driven to that. And I think I've got a slide in here in a little bit about some myths about suicide, so I want you to attend to those myths that we kind of think is typically, a male and a young male, adolescent, blah, blah, but so that displays that myth. But they have done research on whether Christians, spiritual people, but particularly Christians, are less resistant for suicide for two main reasons. And there might be more than this, but this is where I don't have all this on my slide. This is from my head and not my heart. But two main reasons is, one, they think of it as a sin.
Right.
I don't know. I'm not talking about, we don't need to go into theology whether it is or whether it's not, but they think of it as a sin. They were always told that it's a sin. And the second reason is they don't want to be a burden to others, okay? And they also don't want to, they do have faith that God does love them, even though they have, the pain is so bad, the depression is so bad, the anxiety is so bad, they may even be hallucinating, but there are certain reasons that Christians are a little bit less because of those.
Okay. That's good to know, actually. So you said a minute ago that you had, I think, a list of something that you were going to talk about here in a minute. What was it? Anybody remember what I was asking? We'll go on. This question, I'm not even going to ask this question. Talk to us about warning signs of suicide.
Okay.
Because we all probably think we know,
Okay.
but tell us some of the ones that we don't know.
Okay. I'll just do this myth slide real quickly then. So,
Okay.
So there's these myths that are around. Part of the myth is that if you mention suicide or do you feel like killing yourself, that will put the idea in your head. Wrong. Okay? And so that is not, by asking about it, that does not promote suicidal behaviors. If this one over here on the corner, I'm sorry, I don't think the font is very good on that, I apologize. But if they're really serious about suicide, there's nothing you can do to stop them. Absolutely, positively wrong. The suicide hotline is there, it is helpful, it works. I mean, that doesn't mean we don't have suicides, of course we do, unfortunately. But that is wrong. And you can read the other, they're all up here for myths, and that we should, keep that into consideration as we move on. Yeah, it's 288. And Linda, you're so bright. Right there it is. So 211, we already learned that new thing. You already have 911, right? Mm-hmm. So now we got 988. That's the suicide hotline. And they just started opening, this is a national hotline. And interestingly enough, our crisis center for this area is Muncie. I just thought that was funny. They field your call to Muncie. But anyway, they were introducing it and says it's not available in all states, and so I called it. And the first thing I said was, I'm not suicidal, but I just want to know, I'm going to give this talk. I want to see, is this true in Indiana, and blah, blah, blah. So anyway.
And it was.
It was.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
She said, well, we will send you on to the local suicide prevention people. I said, no, I'm okay. I just want to make sure it works. So anyway,
okay.
So that's what you learned.
Okay.
So just some helpful information on suicidal patients, okay? Just kind of read.
So is this about the warning signs?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
It'll get there in a minute.
Okay.
So you asked earlier the relationship between some of the earlier anxiety, depression, and the suicide.
Uh-huh.
Here is an example of you do a psychological autopsy on patients who have died of suicide. 90% of the people who die by suicide, again, I should have mentioned this on slide number 1. Instead of committed suicide, we should use the term committed suicide all the time. You have to use a new language, and that is died by suicide. Because the notion of that they committed this, again, puts the blame on them, when in fact, so much of this is a pain and suffering that they see no end, and so therefore it overcomes them. again, it's just so much to say, and
It's okay, Karen.
I'm not doing disservice on this. I feel bad about
You're
it.
doing so much more than we had
Okay.
45 minutes ago. So you're doing well. Thank you.
Okay. So again, 90% of the people have these conditions, but major depressive, bipolar, so you can read them then. 20% of us will have a suicide in our immediate family.
It's a lot.
That's sobering, sobering. And then 60% will know somebody who did. Now, this is important too. You asked earlier on who is more likely to commit suicide. Everybody's at risk. We've already established that. But 4 times as many men as women die by suicide. However, women attempt suicide more often, okay? And what is in your mind, why do you think that is? Why do more men die of suicide and while more women try to commit suicide? What's the difference? The way, and what is the biggest key to that? Well, not only that, but what, somebody say it. Gun.
You can't pump your stomach when you're shooting yourself in the head, right?
Yes, guns.
Yeah.
This is a whole nother topic. I've got chills. I'm so sorry, I have chills. But the ease at which people can get guns, and that's another topic. But anyway, it's very important.
Right.
So I just wanted to point that out. So you got the new number on the suicide line. Now this, I just really want you to think about this. You can think about it later. But do you really want to die, or do you want the pain to go away? Very good question. As you're trying, what is the real issue? And the real issue is when we have something painful, we've got palliation. We have ways in which we can palliate physical pain, emotional pain, other kinds of shortness of breath, dyspnea, whatever is the pain, the antipsychotics, because many of the people that commit suicide are hearing voices that are telling them they're a bad person, you'd be better off dead, you're a burden to your parents, just end your life, and everybody will be better. So that's an important question to say. And then when you're talking about treatment, basically, I've given you some other ways, is you diminish the symptoms that you can control.